Hello and welcome. You found the Social Work Podcast. My name's Jonathan Singer, and I'll be your host as we explore all things social work. Hey there, podcast listeners. Jonathan here. 10 years ago, literally 10 years and one day ago, on episode 103, I spoke with Rick Barth about the brand new grand challenges for social work. In that episode, Rick introduced the idea of a grand challenge and talked about a 10-year timeline for focusing resources and attention to address 12 problems to be solved. Things like ensuring healthy development for youth, promoting smart decarceration, eradicating social isolation, and reducing extreme economic inequality. Now, one of those 12 was harness technology for social good, and I had a personal connection to it. I had co-authored one of the two working papers that started it alongside Stephanie Berzin and Chitat Chan. Harness tech was unique in that it was the only one of the 12 that wasn't framed as a problem to be solved. And as we came to think of it, the grand challenge around social work and technology was really the idea that social work needed to take technology seriously in the classroom, in practice, in research, and eventually it did, starting on March 13th, 2020, aka the day the COVID-19 pandemic came to the USA. At the time of the interview with Rick, the grand challenges for social work was a shiny new idea, and there was a lot of buzz around the possibility of making measurable progress on solving these 12, or at least 11, issues. Now, at the end of the interview, I asked Rick, so imagine it's 2025, and you're invited to give a talk commemorating the 10-year anniversary of the Grand Challenge Initiative. What do you hope that you will be able to say about how the field has advanced in 10 years?
I hope that for each of the 12 grand challenges, there would be very clear and measurable goals that have been identified, and that for most of them, if not all of them, there would be substantial progress in addressing those goals. It may be that we won't have the resources to measure all of that impact, which is an expensive enterprise, but I would hope that we would at least have the theories in place, the interventions in place, training programs that we're beginning to prepare people to do that innovative work, collaborations across disciplines, which is going to be critical to this effort, funders who are interested in what we were doing and had committed to some of the development of these grand challenges. And very importantly, I would hope that there would be enough work between the grand challenges to share the new innovations in research methods and intervention development and technology and surveying and sampling and measuring outcomes and social media to communicate these outcomes, so that the entire enterprise of social work would be lifted up in terms of what people expected of us, knowing that they could expect strong, well-evaluated, reasoned analyses and clear communication resulting from any investment they made in social work.
So in addition to be able to look back and seeing this is what was achieved, it also sounds like not just that there's good for the greater society, but also that there's a benefit for social work, which is that people are able to see social work and see it as making valuable contributions to society, maybe in ways that they never imagined.
Absolutely. We would certainly hope that there would be students who are now in 8th grade who would then be attracted to social work as a profession. They would see that the opportunities are great here, that it's incredibly exciting and promising work to do, that they would choose this path over other possible paths, and that people who are thinking about changing careers would give very high regard to becoming part of the grand challenges of social work by joining the social work profession, that the effect would be a invigorated, well-resourced profession that was recruiting the best talent into the profession and creating interesting enough and rewarding enough work to maintain and retain great social workers over long periods of time who were enhancing the well-being of society.
That was 10 years ago. That's so wild. 10 years in, Rick continues to be involved in the grand challenges, but there's new leadership. In today's episode, I'm talking with Carrie Pettus, chair of the executive board for the Grand Challenges for Social Work. Today's episode explores the 10-year journey of the Grand Challenges, reflecting on its evolution, its measurable impacts, and the critical lessons learned along the way. Carrie talks about successes, including creating a vast social and professional network dedicated to solving some of the most persistent social problems, and some of the challenges, including the difficulty defining and measuring impact, which she acknowledged is ironic, given that the initiatives are led by some of the leading scholars in the world. She also acknowledged some of the misses, such as uneven involvement of frontline social workers and not including an initiative explicitly focusing on eliminating racism until a few years ago. We ended the conversation with Carrie discussing the importance of sustainability and resources if the Grand Challenges for Social Work initiative is to continue for another 10 years. And now, without further ado, on to episode 150 of the Social Work Podcast, the Grand Challenges for Social Work, 10-year update with Dr. Carrie Pettus. So Carrie, 10 years in, what did the Grand Challenges get right and what did it get wrong?
I think what the Grand Challenges did best is create social networks of people focused on some of society's toughest challenges. And we have gone beyond geographic boundaries. We eliminated them as a barrier to having communities of practice using science to understand our really difficult challenges and to make progress towards addressing them. I think our biggest miss in doing this work is we didn't document it. We were a bunch of scientists that didn't document our own process. And because of that, when people ask questions about our measurable impact, how we moved the needle in different scientific areas, and even how we moved the needle in people's career trajectories, we can't give them quantitative findings. All we can do is talk about anecdotal stories and point to thousands of articles and presentations and books that have been produced as a result of the initiative. So going forward, it will be really important for us researchers to empirically assess our own progress and to come up with an agreed upon set of outcomes that will feel meaningful to the field, that are above and beyond each of the issues that the Grand Challenges are tackling.
So what are some areas where there was some real measurable impact?
Well, it depends on how you define impact. And this is a conversation I've been having a lot lately. There has always been critiques that the Grand Challenges, as we moved through the years, wasn't having an impact. And nobody ever defined the word impact. So what I discovered recently is when people were saying impact, what they were talking about was the problem being solved that each network addressed. So was promote smart decarceration resulting in decarceration? Was eliminate racism changing the nature of racism in this country? And over the past 10 years, there were significant impacts in things like decarceration. And there were significant impacts in racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're at the beginning of 2026 right now during this interview, and a lot of those impacts were erased because society shifted out from under us. Does that mean those networks didn't have any impact? Or does that mean that humans were behaving like humans, and as our societal structures reorganized, the problems we are addressing intensified? So what I've realized recently is that we've missed the mark on having a conversation about what impact is. As human societies have evolved, our innovations, our progress have evolved, and that's because the humans creating them have become more educated. They've coordinated differently. They've concentrated resources differently. The opportunities for career trajectories have become different in ways that improved knowledge and innovation and technology. And that is what the Grand Challenges has done in a microcosm within the profession of social work. We have exponentially changed the way we talk about, the way we think about, and the way we study and tackle major societal problems. And we now have a concentration of intellectual, financial, human capital, all marching forward towards solving these different issues. People see themselves clearly in roles in social work that they never did before. And I think when people have conversations about does the Grand Challenges have impact or not, that is not the conversation they're having, and I think it should be.
How well did the Grand Challenges bring frontline practitioners and communities into the work?
So people talk about this quite a bit, and I think the first thing to recognize is that each network has engaged in the Grand Challenge they're addressing differently. So I was previously a co-lead of the Promote Smart Decarceration Network. Everything that we did in our own research agendas that were tied to the Promote Smart Decarceration Network, and everything we did around our events and our collective efforts involved community partners. So one of the first activities that we did as a Promote Smart Decarceration Network was to hold a convening of 100 different researchers, practitioners, people with lived experience in incarceration, their family members, senators, Congress people, all participated in this day-and-a-half-long event that ultimately resulted in the publication of a book. And half of the chapters in the book were practitioners or people with lived experience, and half were researchers. So that's one example of a network that was highly involved with community and practitioners. Another network that is focused on economic progress. That network has changed federal policy and state policies, but they weren't partnering with communities to do it. Does that mean that it wasn't applied? No. It means that their vehicle of impact required legislatures and staffers. So I don't know that we say they're not engaging community, because I think when people ask about engaging community, they're asking whether our science is actually making a difference in the field. And I would say that, federal policy, one of which resulted in our current administration calling them Trump accounts instead of child savings accounts, that's enormous impact on the community, right? But it's through a different mechanism. I think maybe what the better question that we all should be asking ourselves is, are there frameworks and models that haven't been written up yet by the networks that can talk about how our research and our discoveries can be the most applied? I think that's the question we should be talking about.
So looking back, how successfully did the Grand Challenges initiative address racial and social equity, and where did it miss the mark?
Yeah, I'm not avoiding the question with this first response, but I do think it circles back to a conversation we were having earlier, in that is the issue of measurement and the lack of documentation of what's been happening within each of these networks. So in the shortest answer is, I don't think we know. But what we did see is that the intentional, I'm trying to think of the right word, but the intentional placement of social equity, racial and social equity, as a intended outcome in terms of ameliorating it was not clear. In the invitation of concept papers, in the assessment of what ideas constituted grand challenges or not, and in the selection of the grand challenges networks. And as a result, there was a reactionary response. We need a new network about addressing racism. We need to tell the networks that they need to be more intentional about that. But because it wasn't a founding framework, I think that it most likely did get missed as a central premise in many of the networks. And I think there are many reasons why it could have gotten missed, but one of those is the assumption that because social work has a code of ethics that says we, by definition as a profession, ethically commit to promoting social equity and racial equity, that assumption was problematic in that when people become initially socialized as social work students, they sign the code of ethics. And then oftentimes in our educational practices, our research practice, our translation of scientific discoveries to the field, we are silent on social equity and racial equity because we just assume that's the platform that everybody's coming from, which we also assume that everybody understands what social work is. So I suspect that we missed the mark, but I will say that we didn't measure it. So I don't feel confident in making an informed comment on how well we did it or not.
Well, and I know that when I talked to Rick Barth 10 years ago about this, about not just racial equity, but specifically, he said, well, there are lots of things that aren't standalone, like poverty is not a standalone grand challenge. And I think his thought at that time was that there was the assumption that it would be embedded and integrated into each initiative. Naturally. Right. Because how can you address technology without addressing racial and social inequities? How can you address issues of isolation, right? Issues of smart decarceration, right? All these issues without addressing them. And so I think he would have said that there was an assumption, and then maybe those assumptions didn't pan out, right? Because there was a 13th Grand Challenge initiative added, right?
Right. And you know what they say about assumptions. And I won't finish the rest of that statement. But I mean, there are ways. So promote smart decarceration. We have a very solid history of showing that you can decarcerate and increase racial disparities. We did it from about 1994 to 2026, and we're still going. So I think the assumptions are very dangerous. And that is something looking towards the future that we need to be even more intentional and clearer about than some people within their networks may have thought they were already being.
So if you were to start the Grand Challenges today and organize initiatives and do all that sort of stuff, what would it look like? What would the topics be? Would they be the same? Would they be different?
Yeah, it's something that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about and having a lot of conversations around. And I would say the first thing that I would do is better financially resource the initiative prior to launching it. It is mind-blowing what has been accomplished entirely by volunteer power. And the amount of time that the network leads have remained engaged in the initiative. Many of the network leads have been there for 10 years. And then it was a year or two even getting to that point because they proposed concept papers and things like that. And so if we have more, almost 100 volunteers who have been there for over 10 years, who have engaged other people, proselytized, so to speak, the grand challenges to engage other people, something was beneficial to them. And by not appropriately financing the initiative, we have handcuffed them for the past decade on the type of impact they can have on the outcome that each network is addressing. So that is, I believe, should be a flashing light of, if I was launching it today, the ability of the networks to achieve their objectives and goals would be tenfold if we had financially resourced it. And so you can't wait till you have the finances before you launch in every initiative, but maybe you can have a little more. And build it into the model. The second thing that I would do if I launch the initiative for the first time today is build in mechanisms for tracking what is happening. Tracking the social networks, there's all sorts of social network analysis methodology, tracking how the problem is shifting over time in terms of if scientific discoveries are actually being implemented into the field. I would track incoming students and emerging scholars and how their research ties in to the grand challenges. And I would have I wouldn't initially, but I would build a timeline for when the profession should be engaging other disciplines in the problem from a leadership perspective across the Grand Challenges initiatives. Because I know people talked about starting there, but sometimes you need to figure out your own identity in an initiative before you can engage other people in sharing their identities in making progress towards an issue. So those are some of the early things that I would do. The other thing that I would do is more intentionally be present at all the different professional societies that social work has and all the different convenings, because the Grand Challenges has been most present at the Society for Social Work and Research conference. And I think going forward, it's really important to be present at numerous national organizations of social work, so that, to Elizabeth's point earlier, everybody can see themselves in the initiative. You asked also about, and I'll end here because I don't know the answer, but you asked about what outcomes would be different, and that's one of the things we're thinking about and talking about too, is how do we simplify describing what the Grand Challenges is doing. And I think that simplification would also make it much clearer on what our outcomes could and should be.
So, Carrie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about the last 10 years of the Grand Challenge and some of the thoughts about what we might be looking forward to in the future.
Thank you so much for doing this podcast. It's really important to share our story.
I'm Jonathan Singer, and thanks for being with me today for another episode of the Social Work Podcast. If you missed an episode or have suggestions for future episodes, please visit socialworkpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our online store at cafepress.com/swpodcast. To all the social workers out there, keep up the good work. We'll see you next time at the Social Work Podcast.